She walked in quietly, almost unnoticed. No loud footsteps, no flashy gear. Just a plain woman in a simple outfit, carrying a worn-out rifle case. The shooting range was already buzzing. Targets being hit, cheers echoing from the far end, and groups of people exchanging stories about their best shots. It was the kind of place where reputation mattered. Everyone knew who was good, and more importantly, everyone thought they knew who wasn't. That day, the range had its usual crowd of enthusiasts and a few professionals. Most were men. Most were loud. Some were clearly regulars, nodding to each other, sharing tips, giving half smiles of approval after a decent shot. And then there was her, standing off to the side, quietly observing, not saying a word. A few eyes glanced her way, but quickly moved on. She didn't look like competition. Some probably assumed she was just watching. Maybe she came with someone. Maybe she was lost. Whatever they thought, no one seemed to think she was there to shoot. One guy even chuckled. "She holding that for her husband," he muttered to his friend, just loud enough for others to hear. His friend smirked but didn't reply. They turned their backs and kept talking, ignoring her completely. She didn't react, didn't frown, didn't even look up. She simply walked over to the sign-up sheet, added her name, and waited her turn. Not a single person asked her anything. No one offered advice or made room. It was like she wasn't there. When her name was finally called, a few people raised their eyebrows. One guy even whispered, "Wait, she's actually shooting." Someone laughed quietly. Another mumbled something about a waste of time. But she stepped forward, calm and slow, and made her way to the booth. People kept chatting behind her, not paying much attention. The current record holder was there that day, a guy everyone called the Eagle. Sharp eyes, steady hands, years of experience. His name was all over the wall, the one where high scores were posted with pride. No one expected her to come close to that. No one expected her to even hit the target. She took her position. The rifle case clicked open. Inside was an old but well-kept bolt-action rifle. Not modern, not impressive. It looked like something from a war movie. The kind of gun people kept for memories, not for breaking records. More smirks followed. Someone shook their head and looked back at their phone. A few people were just waiting for her to miss so they could move on. She loaded a single bullet, took a deep breath, raised the rifle. The way she moved, it wasn't flashy. It was smooth, almost like she had done this 1,000 times. Still, no one paid much attention. The guy next to her even looked bored. And then she pulled the trigger. The sound rang out and echoed across the range. Sharp, clean, the kind of sound that made people stop just for a second. The range master checked the target. At first, he blinked, then looked again. He turned around and said nothing, just pointed to the scoreboard. One by one, heads turned. Conversations faded. Phones went down. Someone whispered, "No way." Another said, "What just happened?" And then the scoreboard updated. Her name appeared right below the old record, but only for a moment, because seconds later, the score ticked again, and she had beaten it. Gasps, silence, then louder murmurs. People leaned in. Even the champion stood up, confused. He asked the range master to double-check. They did. Twice. It was true. One shot. One record. Just like that. She didn't turn around to see their faces. She didn't smile or raise a hand. She just calmly stepped back, opened the bolt, and placed the rifle back in its case. Still no words. Still no reaction. Now, no one could ignore her, but she didn't seem to care if they did. The silence didn't last long. It turned into whispers, then full-on conversations. People were turning their heads, asking questions. Who is she? Did she really just do that? Was that a lucky shot? But the woman didn't respond to any of it. She just walked over to the bench and sat down like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, others were still trying to figure out what they had just seen. The range master kept glancing at the scoreboard, then back at the booth. He looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Even the Eagle, the man whose record had just been broken, was now staring straight at her. He wasn't angry. He looked puzzled, maybe even impressed. But more than anything, he looked unsure, because this wasn't normal. This wasn't supposed to happen. Another shooter stepped up. People tried to get back into their routines, but it wasn't the same anymore. Every shot after hers felt dull, less exciting. The new shooters were decent, even good, but no one came close to what she had just done. And now, instead of watching their friends or checking their phones, everyone kept looking back at her. She sat there with her hands resting on her knees, completely still. A few people started trying to make sense of it all. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe the wind helped her. But those who really knew shooting, the ones who understood precision, weren't so quick to dismiss it. A man in his late 50s, someone who'd been coming to the range for years, leaned over to another regular and said, "That shot wasn't lucky. That was clean. Tight. You don't get that from guessing." His friend nodded slowly. She knew what she was doing, he said. You could see it in how she handled the rifle, like it was part of her. Still, no one had answers, and she wasn't giving any. She wasn't wearing anything that suggested she belonged to a shooting club. No patches, no badges, no expensive gear, just jeans, boots, and a quiet stare. Someone finally got the nerve to walk over. A young man, probably in his 20s. He offered a compliment. "Hey, that was amazing." She looked at him, nodded once, then looked away. Not rude, just reserved. He waited a few seconds for her to say more, but she didn't. So he just smiled and walked back to his group. Then came another name on the call list. Hayes again. It was her second turn. Now, the crowd paid attention. All of them. Even the people who'd been chatting, laughing, or packing up earlier were standing still. She stood up slowly, carried her rifle back to the booth, and took her position. No one was whispering this time. All eyes were on her. She went through the same motions. Load, breathe, aim, fire. The shot echoed again. But this time, people didn't wait for the score. They rushed to the monitor. Another bullseye. And not just a bullseye, tighter than the last one. The room changed. You could feel it. The range had turned from a casual afternoon hangout to something else entirely. Now, everyone was talking about her. The people who laughed earlier, silent. The ones who thought she was just there to watch, now staring like they were seeing something rare. She walked back to the bench again. Calm, steady, still not saying a word. Someone finally asked the range master, "Do you know who she is?" He shook his head. Never seen her before. Not once. Another voice chimed in. She has to be military or trained. No way that's normal. But nobody could confirm anything. She had just shown up. No announcement. No introduction. And now she was making every record on the wall look like it didn't matter. People started taking photos of the scoreboard. Someone filmed the booth from a distance. A few of the regulars looked nervous. One of them, a former state-level competitor, quietly packed his gear and left without saying goodbye. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was respect, or maybe he just knew that today no one was going to remember his name. But everyone would remember Hayes, even if they didn't know it yet. By now, the entire range was tuned in. Every conversation had shifted to one person, the quiet woman with the old rifle and the impossible aim. She hadn't spoken more than a few words, but her presence filled the room. Every time she moved, eyes followed. Every time she touched the rifle, people straightened up, waiting to see what she would do next. The local reporter, who usually covered weekend tournaments, had heard about the scene and showed up, holding a camera and notepad. He walked straight to the range master and asked, "Who is she?" The man just shrugged. "No idea," he said, "but she's not just passing through. That kind of precision, nobody just stumbles into it." The woman stood once more when her third turn came around. Some people had already started whispering theories. A few guessed she was ex-military. Others said she might have trained overseas. One man was convinced she had Olympic-level skills. But none of them could explain why someone like her, with that kind of talent, would walk into a small-town shooting range and break a long-standing record without fanfare. She didn't seem to care what people were saying. As she loaded the next round, her focus stayed locked on the target. Her breathing slow, her hands steady. There was something oddly graceful about the way she held the rifle, as if she wasn't just aiming. It was like she was in complete harmony with it. Another shot. This time, the score monitor didn't just flash green. It lit up with a new personal best. Higher than her last. Sharper than her first. There was a beat of silence before the room erupted, not in wild cheering, but in stunned amazement. The kind of moment when people realize they are witnessing something special, something they'll be talking about for years. The reporter tried to approach her again, this time gently. "Excuse me, could I ask your name?" She glanced up, offered a polite smile, and said quietly, "Not important." Then she turned back toward the bench and wiped down the barrel of her rifle with a clean cloth. Some of the more experienced shooters began discussing her form. "Look at her elbow," one pointed out. "Perfect position. No unnecessary movement." Another added, "It's like she calculates everything before she pulls the trigger. There's no guessing. It's all controlled." A few of them were trying to mimic her style during their own turns, but no one came close. Even the staff at the range had gathered at the back of the room, watching like spectators at a championship event. One of them whispered, "I've worked here 10 years. I've seen state champs, military shooters, even a couple of Olympic trainees. But I've never seen anything like her." Someone started recording discreetly, not wanting to disturb her. The video would later be posted online, titled simply, "Unknown Woman Breaks Shooting Record with One Shot." Within hours, it would begin circulating in forums and groups where people debated everything from her stance to her breathing technique. Some would try to identify her, comparing the footage with competition archives and military databases. But for now, she remained a mystery. A teenager in the crowd, no older than 16, approached her cautiously during a break. He was holding his own small hunting rifle, hands trembling slightly. He said, "That was amazing. I want to shoot like you someday." She looked at him, smiled softly, and said, "Just keep practicing. Don't let anyone tell you you can't." Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind her words, like someone who had been told no many times before and had proven every one of them wrong. The boy nodded, almost starstruck, and went back to his father, who patted him on the shoulder. Other people watched the exchange, and for the first time that day, the crowd wasn't just curious. They were inspired. Her actions were saying something powerful, louder than any speech, clearer than any medal. Skill doesn't always come with a spotlight. Greatness doesn't always ask permission. And sometimes, the one person nobody notices turns out to be the one they'll never forget. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What started as a routine day at the shooting range had transformed into something few people there would ever forget. The whispers had faded, replaced by quiet awe. There was no more laughter at her expense, no more second glances meant to size her up. Now, everyone was watching with respect, and maybe even a little bit of intimidation. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need to. Her actions had already told a story, one more powerful than words. And the more she shot, the more people realized this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't just a lucky day for some unknown woman. This was real skill, the kind that came from years of repetition, failure, and progress no one ever saw. Even the eagle had finally walked over. He wasn't wearing the usual confidence he was known for. Instead, he carried a look of curiosity and something that looked a lot like humility. "I don't know where you've been training," he said, standing a few feet from her, "but I'd like to shake your hand." She stood, gave a small nod, and reached out. "Nice to meet you," she said, her voice even and calm. He smiled and added, "You've got something special. That's not easy to admit, but it's obvious." She didn't react much, just gave a half smile and returned to her seat. People had started gathering in small groups, talking about her shot grouping, how she barely flinched under pressure, how she didn't seem to care whether people were watching or not. Some began calling her the Ghost, a nickname that started as a whisper but would later be remembered like legend. One man, a former trainer for a competitive shooting team, stood near the back with his arms crossed. "You don't get that calm under pressure without serious training," he said. "And not just casual practice. That's military-level focus. Or better." But the strange part was, no one could find anything about her. No one at the range knew her name. No past competition footage popped up. She wasn't in the regular circuits. She wasn't on any leaderboard. She had just appeared out of nowhere and outshot everyone without breaking a sweat. Later that afternoon, someone suggested she shoot in the monthly competition. It was unofficial, mostly just for bragging rights, but it was where reputations were made. The prize? A small trophy and a gift card to a local sports store. Not much in the way of rewards, but that wasn't what it was about. She listened quietly, then nodded. "Sure," she said. That was it. Now, things were different. Instead of people waiting for her to mess up, they were hoping to see more. A crowd formed as her turn came. She stood up, walked to the lane, and prepared once more. The noise in the room faded again. Even the loudest talkers had gone quiet. Everyone wanted to hear the sound of the shot. Everyone wanted to see where it landed. She fired. The monitor updated almost instantly. Bullseye. Again. But this time, the range master walked over and checked the paper target himself. He stood there a moment longer than usual, then turned and gave a slow, stunned nod to the others. "She split the center line," he said. "Dead center. Almost no margin." He walked back with the target in hand, showing it to anyone who wanted a closer look. There was a small tear right in the heart of the bullseye. As clean as any shot could ever be. Someone clapped. Then another. And then the room filled with applause, not the kind meant to flatter, but the kind that comes from real admiration. She looked around, maybe a little surprised, then nodded once and sat back down. A few kids asked for a picture. She politely declined, but not in a rude way. "I'm not really a camera person," she said, with a small grin. One of the parents whispered, "She's old school." I like that. By now, even the regulars who had been coming for years were shaking their heads in disbelief. Not because they were upset, but because they knew what they had witnessed wasn't ordinary. It was a kind of moment people don't see twice. And while she may not have said much, every shot she took spoke louder than anything else could. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the shooting range. The air was cooler now, but no one was thinking about the time. No one was packing up or heading to their cars. Everyone had stayed, waiting for what she might do next. It was like the range had stopped being just a place for practice. It had become a stage, and she was the center of it all. The scoreboard was still glowing, her name at the top. People kept glancing at it, almost in disbelief, like they expected it to change. But it didn't. Her scores were still there, untouched, unchallenged. And even the seasoned shooters, the ones who usually competed for those top spots, stood off to the side now, quietly respecting what had happened. There was talk of adding her score to the permanent wall, the one reserved for records no one thought could be beaten. A few people had already taken photos and sent them to local shooting clubs, friends, even online forums. Some were waiting for someone to come forward and say they knew her. Maybe a coach, a former teammate, anyone. But no one did. She had taken another seat, not in the front, not in the center, just at the edge of the room, sipping water from a plastic bottle, staring out toward the targets. Not bored, not smug, just still. Her rifle lay across her lap, clean, carefully packed, but still ready. A man in his 40s, tall and built like a soldier, approached her cautiously. He didn't look arrogant, just curious. "You ever think about joining a competition circuit?" he asked. She looked up, held his gaze for a moment, then said, "Not really my thing." He chuckled softly. "Could have fooled me." Others began stepping forward, not to challenge her, but to ask questions. How long had she been shooting? Who trained her? What kind of rifle was she using? Most of the time, she gave short answers. A long time. "My grandfather." Custom bolt action. But none of her words gave away much, and that only made her more fascinating. The teenager who had spoken to her earlier had taken a position on the far end, trying again with his father watching nearby. You could see the difference in him now. He wasn't just shooting. He was trying. Watching his form, adjusting his grip, breathing carefully. He was inspired, not just by his skill, but by the quiet confidence she carried. She noticed. After his turn, she walked over and leaned in. "You held too long," she said gently. "Don't let the nerve control your trigger." The boy nodded, listening closely. It was the most anyone had heard her say to another person all day. The father gave her a quiet thank you, and she nodded in return. The range master, a man who had worked there for more than 2 decades, finally stepped forward holding a certificate. "We usually reserve this for monthly champs," he said, "but I think today's an exception." She looked at it, then at him. "I appreciate that," she said. He handed it to her. She didn't pose with it, didn't ask for a photo. She simply folded it in half and tucked it into her case like it was a receipt from a grocery store. Someone from the back of the room called out, "You coming back next week?" She paused for a second, then said, "Maybe." It was a simple word, but it carried weight, because now everyone hoped she would. The talk shifted again. What if she enters the state championship? What if she trains others? Imagine her teaching a class. But she didn't seem interested in any of that. She wasn't there for fame, or recognition, or even competition. It seemed like she was there for one reason only, to shoot. She had packed her things and was making her way to the door. As she walked past the tables, a few people gave small nods, quiet signs of respect. One man stepped aside to let her through, tipping his cap. Another woman, holding her own gear bag, smiled and said, "Hope we see you again." She replied with a soft, "Take care." Then she disappeared through the door, leaving behind only the scoreboard, the target sheets, and a room full of people who would never forget the day a simple woman walked into the range and reminded everyone what quiet greatness really looked like. The range felt quieter now, even though people were still talking. The kind of quiet that lingers after something important has happened, as if the walls themselves were holding on to the moment. A few shooters tried to return to their practice routines, but it wasn't the same. Their shots felt slower, less certain. Even the regular sounds of metal clicking and paper tearing seemed distant. Out in the parking lot, someone spotted her loading the rifle case into the trunk of an old pickup truck. Nothing fancy. No sponsor stickers. No decals boasting achievements or affiliations. Just a faded paint job and a pair of worn-out boots stepping up into the driver's seat. She didn't rush, just moved with the same calm, careful pace she had all day. Like every motion mattered. A couple of onlookers stayed at the windows, watching her drive away. One of them muttered, "I still can't believe that happened." Another replied, "She didn't even look like she wanted to prove anything. She just did it." And maybe that was the most surprising part. She hadn't shown up with an ego, hadn't tried to make a scene, hadn't looked for attention. She'd simply done what she came to do, and left without asking for applause. Inside, the conversation started to take new shape. "Did you notice the way she checked the wind before every shot?" one man asked. "Yeah," someone else replied. She didn't even use a fancy gauge. Just licked her finger and paused for a second. Old school stuff. That kind of detail stuck with people, especially the older shooters who'd grown up on basics before all the digital tools came along. A young woman at the range counter pulled up the target she'd fired during her final round. She held it carefully, almost like it was fragile. "I've never seen a group that tight," she said quietly. It's like she wasn't even trying hard, just breathing and pressing the trigger like it was second nature. Another staff member walked over and tapped the edge of the sheet. "That's control," he said. "Not just skill, discipline." And then, slowly, something shifted again. The questions about her identity faded into a deeper sense of curiosity, not just about her past, but about what had shaped her. What kind of mindset it took to walk into a place full of strangers, keep to yourself, and outperform everyone without needing to say a word. People started wondering what her life looked like beyond the range. Did she practice in secret? Was she taught by someone forgotten by time? Or had she simply dedicated herself quietly, while the rest of the world looked the other way? Even the younger kids who had been there that day began to look at the range differently. It wasn't just a place for noise and targets anymore. It was something more. A place where even a quiet person could make the loudest impression. One of the instructors noticed it too. "I saw 3 kids stay behind to ask for advice after she left," he told a colleague. "That's never happened before." Back near the score monitor, the range master took a small notepad from the front desk and scribbled her name down. Well, part of it. No one had gotten her full name, just the first, Claire. He taped the note above the scoreboard. It read, Asterisk Claire, cleaner shot, 10 out 10 star. Someone had drawn a small star next to it. And just like that, a new story began forming. Not just about a record, but about a moment. About how someone came in and reminded everyone why they loved the sport in the first place. Not for medals, not for trophies, but for the beauty of a shot done right. Later that night, the local range social media account uploaded a photo of the target sheet. The caption was simple, when precision speaks louder than words. It was liked hundreds of times within hours, shared in forums, discussed in comments. People from other states began asking, who is she? Where did she come from? Will she be back? No one had answers, but everyone had the same feeling, that something rare had passed through, something humble, quiet, and sharper than any shot they'd ever seen. And though she was gone, her presence was still there, floating in the air like the echo of a single, perfect round.